Welcome to Automotive EV. My name is Peter Wooding and thank you for joining us. Today is episode 2 within our battery supply chain series, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Justin Benson, who's a partner of Vendigital and lead on automotive. So if it's okay with Justin, I'm going to hand over to you to give us your views on the automotive outlook as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. Peter, thank you for the opportunity to present again. So it's my job today to give a view of the electric vehicle market and how that's developing. Some of you will have seen this before, so I'm updating the presentations I've done in the past, but hopefully we'll give some particular twists as to how things are developing both locally and globally, and also and as Peter's referred to, what's going on in the battery world as well, to a great lesser extent. I think most of you will be aware that there's a huge amount going on in the battery world, because electric vehicles aren't the only product that need them, but it's a really important part, and electric vehicles are driving the demand for batteries at the moment. So it's fascinating supply chain that is developing and building every day. So without further ado, let's crack on. I shared this last time. It's the reason for sharing it with you really is to sort of say that the worldwide manufacture of cars or sales of cars is I believe going to remain broadly stagnant at the moment when you think of it globally. The big change is that people are going to be doing more miles in the vehicles, and these vehicles are becoming more and more well utilized as we develop our mobility solutions for the future. So it's interesting. I mean, clearly the pandemic is having an effect, and it'd be great to see that number from 2021 to go up to more like 2019 numbers in 2022, 23. But I don't see huge growth in overall vehicle sales over the coming years. It's more about what goes on in that particular in the the vehicle markets, which is most interesting, I think, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. So that was just so from a global perspective. So it's probably worth talking about some of the negative things going on in the market, because they are having some profound effects, and it's not just in vehicles, of course, but in other areas as well. But you'll be aware of semiconductor shortages causing huge issues for all car manufacturers. Some of the higher volume ones perhaps slightly less so, but and some of the smaller manufacturers in the world can give them a bit more of a headache. But it is seen as temporary. Capacity is coming online, and the semiconductor supply chain is starting to cope with the increase in demand. So we're hoping that production levels in vehicles and the demand for semiconductors will get back to more normality as we get into Q4 and Q1 next year. So sort of bad news, good news, but definitely something to keep an eye on as the automotive market develops post-pandemic. There are other supply chain pressures, as again you'll be aware of, and it's causing upward pressure on prices, things like logistics, energy costs, and lead times. The order books are very, very good for new cars in general, and in some specific areas, excellent. It's just the ability to make them is causing some problems, and particularly coming from China. I mean, there was one number I saw the other day where a chest, a box coming from China cost about $3,000 a few months ago, but now you're getting up to $10,000 per crate going forward. So some huge increases there, which again are expected to be short term, but nevertheless they do have a short term impact on the market, which is causing this impact of inflation. All the pundits telling me that it's short term. It'll happen over the next 12 months, but then go back to more normality. I mean, if you take the UK, for example, the forecast is to get up to 4% or 4 point something percent over the next few months, but it will come back down towards the 2% goal of the Bank of England in later on in 2022. we could debate that, but that's the sort of current thinking. And there's an awful lot of pressure on costs at the moment in the supply chain, and it's something to keep a really close eye on. And I can see pricing being affected, not just in the short term, but potentially longer term. So because of these shortages and these issues, of course, manufacturers are very conscious of profit and cash. So volume was always good, but they've got to be profitable and make sure the cash is coming in. So they're being very careful what products they make, and they're aligning the semiconductors they can get, and those rare those rare components, they're aligning them to their most profitable products, which is very sensible and of course what you'd expect. And in some cases, some of the OEMs are becoming more profitable because of it. So it's an interesting learning experience. The one thing that I am seeing on a personal level, data is driving changes in behaviors. So things like insights that companies are getting are changing the way in which people are going to market. You'll have seen the move to online sales of a lot of vehicles during the shutdown. People were still in this year. They were still achieving 60% sales in February, March of vehicles, and that was pretty much 100% was done online. So I'm seeing more of this, and I think auto companies in particular, but I think all companies are getting better at looking at their data and working out how best to serve their customers and become more profitable. So getting into some data now as to what's actually going on. It's interesting how I think this is a supply driven issue, perhaps more than demand, because the orders are pretty, the order books are very strong. So what's happening is that I think that the supply issue is having an effect on the speed at which we recover. So if you look at that gap between the yellow and grey line, the grey line is 2020, the yellow line is 2019. So that obviously all COVID, but the bounce back is somewhere in between at the moment, and at the moment it's going a bit towards the 2020 levels as opposed to the 2019 levels. So I think that's supply driven, but nevertheless, the economy, at least from an automotive perspective in the UK, is bouncing back. And there are some numbers there at the bottom explaining that things like diesel and petrol are coming back as well. And overall sales are up 20%, but we had a very low base in 2020. So it remains to be seen as to how much that can bounce back even more over the next 4 months. So that's specifically all vehicles. This is the battery electric vehicles. I always bring this up because this starts to paint the really positive story. As you can see, the blue is 2021, and despite COVID between 19 and 20, there was 186% growth, and so far this year, on that growth of last year, it is now gone up over 100%, and the market share has now almost doubled to 8.4%. So sorry, there's still my old April numbers, but nevertheless, the numbers have been going up over the over this year, and it's continuing. So I think the big message is here: battery electric vehicles are growing fast, and the demand for the componentry and batteries is growing fast to service those markets. So that's the UK, giving you a bit of a view now in the UK and globally, or at least with China. So if you add in all plug-in vehicles, so that's hybrids and BEVs, you're looking at about 20% at the moment across Europe in market share, and it's still growing. And you're looking at roughly half the market each. So for plug-in hybrids, it's about 50% of the sales, and pure battery electric is about 50% of the sales. And that seems to be continuing. And that's a little bit about the sort of the fashion when you go country to country. Germany, for example, seems to like the plug-in hybrids a bit more than pure battery, although they're still selling a lot of pure battery. Whereas in the UK, we tend to like our pure battery electric vehicles, and that's being the two largest markets in Europe. So it's a slightly mixed picture country to country, but overall in Europe, it's about half and half. If you compare it with China, China have pulled ahead a little bit. You may remember from my previous presentations, Europe and China have been running broadly similar numbers over the last couple of years. China's starting to pull ahead a little bit. I'm kind of pleased about that. I'm not surprised, obviously, because of the population and the production levels that they have being so much higher. But it's good in a way, in the sense that they're moving towards that zero emission, continuing to move towards that zero emission product, and continue to put in regulations and controls around it. And although they have been taking away some of their incentives, the demand has still been going up. And as I say here, they've stolen a march. I mean, that's partly because of the models as well, and model launches in Europe, and we're expecting the Model Y coming out in Q4 this year into Europe. So we could see that we could see Europe pull back in the relative short term. So, but let's keep an eye on that, because that's interesting, because I think China should power ahead anyway, and that's not a bad thing. But it's interesting to make that comparison as to the speed at which battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids are selling globally. Now this slide I shared last time, and it's a forecast from my friend Matthias Schmidt, which I wanted to show it because we're often accused of looking at our crystal ball and making up numbers. But as I'll show you in a minute, I think this is quite an accurate forecast. At least in the short term, it has been quite accurate. But it also reminds you, if you look on the left-hand side, as to why it's so important. The emissions regulation targets that Europe set is really what's driving a lot of this sale, and also, as well as, I think, education and knowledge about climate change. But if the car companies don't make vehicles with low emissions, they have to pay a pretty hefty fine, as was shown by Volkswagen last year. But I don't think they'll be paying fines in the future, because their production levels of battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids are increasing against their current diesel and petrol products. So it's balancing out very quickly. But if that was the forecast that I showed last time, here are some of the actual numbers. So just over 2 million of as plugins surpassed the 2 million rate as we go into July this year. So the numbers going up. This is the last 12 months, and that so this is a sort of 12-month rolling picture. But we're looking at something in the region of that number, I think, for 2021 as well, and we're expecting 1.02 million BEVs expected in 2021. And if you go back to that, this forecast was 1.05 million. So, and again, and I think that's conservative. So we could get to 1.05, and it would be interesting to see how sales go in the last quarter as we continue to bounce back from the pandemic. There was an interesting. I had a meeting the other day with a dealer, and he was saying that the particular OEM, I won't name names to protect the guilty, I guess, but the particular had just launched their new BEV vehicle, and that was about 5-6 months ago, and up until 2 months ago, he said he couldn't give them away because he was trying to push it, if you like, and sell it in his network. But the last 2 months, every inquiry he's getting now has been about that car. So I can see inquiries and footfall, if you like, or virtual footfall, moving towards battery electric vehicle as well, just anecdotally. So keep an eye on the last quarter of this year, as to see it might even bounce back quicker. That's just really, I guess, for the data geeks in the audience to be interested in the breakdown of the numbers and where they're coming from to date to July, and tends to focus on the fact that we're getting up to that over 2 million figure for Europe. And when you think we were in the 800 to 900,000 level last year, the numbers are picking up fast. On that note, I was constantly challenged over the last couple of 2-3 years on the inflection point, saying, yeah, Justin, great, yeah, battery electric vehicles, yeah, it'll happen, but when? And I was always saying it would be about now. It's easy for me to say that now because I think I've got the numbers that prove it. But for those of you that know me, I was always looking at 2020 to 2021 as being a really important inflection point. And I've just picked the biggest 4 markets in Europe to try and indicate that. As you can see, the curve has really started to rise over the last year. in these 4 markets. Some of the Scandinavian countries skew the numbers a bit because they started a lot sooner, and you could look back on that in a different way, but they're sort of plateauing out a little bit. But these 4 now are really embracing the product, and it's really starting to motor, forgive the pun. But it's I thought it was interesting just to look back, because I think history will say that it happened about now. That inflection point is happening, and it'll be interesting to see how it continues over the next 5 years. For those of you into your cars, this is where the money's being spent from a battery electric vehicle perspective. I thought this was interesting because it's a bit like, for those of you as old as me, remember pop pickers from the radio. You've got people coming up and entering the top 10 and those going down. And if you look at the Tesla M3, that continues to be the #1. Fiat 500 has come in very fast in the last few months, and it's selling incredibly well. And then but unfortunately the Leaf fell out of the top 10. So we'll see how that develops. But you're starting to see consumers getting more choice, and they're making those choices, and they're really getting into which electric vehicle they want to own. The one to look out for, I think, I like to think I always said this because I quite like it as a vehicle myself, is the Mustang Mach-E. I think it's one of the it's a great electric vehicle, and launched early last year, or even towards late 2019. That sold, it was a top seller in July. It hasn't made these figures for year to date, but look out for the Mach-E. I think that's going to come up the back straight in the next few months. So keep your eye. If you're in the market for one, I think these are the top cars you should have starting to create your shortlist from. So that's helpful. Moving on. So that's if you like electric vehicles. I think the big message is it's continuing. If anything, my feeling is that it's now quickening up. The inflection point has happened. If you like, the hockey stick for electric vehicles is happening. And for all of those of you in the market, or supplying the market with components, or selling the cars there in the market, this is the big thing at the moment. The electric vehicle market is literally hot. Now that's causing some interesting behaviours, which I mentioned earlier, and interesting issues around the supply chain. But the big area, of course, is now that Europe is developing its battery supply chain. And these are all projects that I talked about last time. I've just repeated. It's the same slide for those of you who might be making comparisons. There's about 26 projects there that are showing up there, which are going to be delivering huge amounts of battery capacity. Most of them, if not all, actually, they're all gigaplants dotted around Europe. And they're all projects going to come online in the next 2 to 4 years. In fact, some might even come online before that. So I guess my point is, again, we're into electric vehicles. All the OEMs are selling electric vehicles. You will probably be supplying or working with a lot of the OEMs developing this, but obviously now is the time to be thinking about your client base and whether or not you should be in the battery industry as well. Lots of issues to move batteries around, and moving the componentry around, but it's something to really get into now and learn about. It's developing fast, and trying to catch up with the likes of China and America, who've got a lot more capacity in this space than we have at the moment. Moving on quickly, that has an effect on the supply chain, of course. This is the traditional supply chain, which is often based, we often talk about it being based in the East or the West, so the USA, South America, Japan, Korea. And if you look at that approach for lithium and how far it travels, it's quite an inefficient way of getting lithium into your electric vehicles, particularly if you're based in Europe. But you'll be aware, I'm sure, that there's a lot of work going on to get supplies in Northern Europe, in Southern Europe, some of the Mediterranean states, and to really start to build a local supply chain. So we're not just going to make batteries in Europe, but we're going to start to make the components, the battery materials, the anodes, the cathodes, the electrolytes will start to be made in Europe as well, which I think is also very exciting. Because you get towards then the mining of these elements, and there are mines and there is sources available right across Europe, including the UK. So again, that is another area that's developing fast and real opportunity for us in the entire electric vehicle value chain. So I hope that's all been interesting. There's a lot of data there, but cost competitiveness can still seems is key, and supply chain efficiency, as a lot of these companies, there's new entrants in electric vehicles, there's new entrants in batteries, there's new entrants in battery materials, new entrants in miners. So sourcing strategies are hugely important now, because you're building them from scratch. What you don't want to do is build in high cost right at the beginning. And I go on about this quite a bit, but we're finding you start joining up systems, you get your data from your multiple systems and start building insights from it, and avoiding silos. You can really get some interesting data that can start to drive different behaviors for your business to make yourself more profitable and sell more of your product. I won't dwell on that. It's a bit of an advert, but that's what, you know, those are all sorts of things that people should be focused on. But I think at that point I'll finish. And but very, very exciting market in electric vehicles at the moment, right across the value chain, and all the suppliers there as well. So hopefully that's been helpful. Peter.
Absolutely, and thank you very much, Justin, for giving us the latest insights, as I'll call it. Quite an eye-opener within certain areas, but obviously we can spend time giving a bit of a plug here. We can spend time and discuss this over a coffee, or ideally a beer, when we're all together in person in November. But
great.
Thanks very much for what you've put into it. As you know, as far as I'm concerned, and you're our go-to person when it comes to these stats. So thanks again. Keep safe, and we'll see you in November. Thanks,
Look
Justin.
forward to it. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
All the best, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Peter again, and thank you for watching the session. Don't forget you can connect with all members within the EV community. Send messages to each other and start to build relationships for the future. Also, take a look at our supplier showrooms. Our partners have got lots of products and services that they have to offer, which again could be of benefit to you. Make the most of the opportunity, and thank you again for joining us.